Each and every time that I hear that a person noticed a cry for help and responded, I'm filled with hope. Studies show that generally when a person is experiencing suicidal thoughts, they may show some type of warning sign that if we are educated and understand what to look for, we might be able to notice. These warning signs can include things like giving away prized possessions, talking or writing about death, or posting about it on social media. If they're talking about it, it means that they're thinking about it, and we need to take that seriously. A dramatic change in mood can also be a warning sign of suicide. Maybe somebody has been doing really well and suddenly seems very down and depressed. Also, somebody who has been down and depressed for a while and then suddenly seems much better, that can actually be a warning of suicide, just because if they have taken the decision to end their life, sometimes that feeling of closure can bring them peace that will change their mood in what appears to be a positive way. Along with warning signs, there are also risk factors for suicide. Life is full of many challenges, but it's important for us to be aware of the things that are going on in the lives of those around us so we can consider how those might affect them and their mental health. So be aware if someone around you is experiencing mental illness, including something like depression or anxiety. Substance abuse can also be a risk factor for suicide, as can experiencing a traumatic event. If you know someone who is experiencing one of these things, please keep a mindful eye on them and try to notice if there's anything that you can do to help. In talking about warning signs, it's also important to point out that although some people do show warning signs, there are not always going to be warning signs before somebody ends their life. Often when somebody dies from suicide, their friends and family ask themselves, what did I miss? How did I not see this coming? And it's important to realize that, maybe there wasn't anything that they missed. Maybe there were no warning signs. And it's important for us to not blame ourselves for not having anticipated such a horrific event. As you watch the following interviews, please keep in mind the risk factors and warning signs that I've discussed with you, and try to notice anything else that these individuals share as they share their stories with us.
Toda mi familia reside en Argentina. Cuando tenía más o menos 19 años, 20, me mudé a Buenos Aires para ir a estudiar. Y allí conocí a mi esposa, donde nos casamos, y después de un tiempo vinimos a vivir a Estados Unidos. Mientras vivía en Buenos Aires, mientras estaba estudiando, mis papás empezaron lo que sería un divorcio. Mi papá siempre fue muy apasionado, muy de emociones fuertes y muy posesivo. Él trabajaba mucho en el campo, y en una oportunidad en la que él viajó al campo para ir a trabajar, mi mamá decidió que ese era el momento oportuno para fugarse y viajó para Buenos Aires y se fue a quedar con nosotros mientras estábamos estudiando. Mi papá, cuando volvió de ese viaje de trabajo en el campo, se encontró con, que mi mamá no estaba, y se encontró con una carta de despedida. Como digo, él era una persona de emociones fuertes, muy apasionado y posesivo. Trató de buscar respuestas a qué era lo que había pasado. Él trataba de ver cómo las podía solucionar las cosas que habían pasado. Y recuerdo que me contaron en sí, mi hermana justo en ese momento estaba en Neuquén, estaba junto a él cuando todo esto pasó, y me contó mi hermana de que ella lo puso como un mar de lágrimas. Él estaba mal, pero no creo que estaba mal tanto por el hecho de que su esposa lo había dejado, sino por el hecho de que era su orgullo que estaba lastimado. Él estaba muy dolido por cómo todo había pasado y que él no pudo hacer nada para evitar eso. Él intentó hablar con su hermana. Me acuerdo que en su momento el novio que salía con mi hermana habló mucho con él. Ese día que él había llegado se puso mal, estuvo llorando, trató de buscar a mi mamá, no la encontraba, la llamaba por teléfono. Obviamente mi mamá el teléfono no lo atendía, ya había apagado el teléfono, nunca más lo prendió. él trataba de buscar algo para poder saber qué era lo que había pasado. Y hubo mucha charla de parte de que en ese entonces era mi cuñado, tratando de calmarlo y bueno, y de decirle de que no era el fin del mundo, de que todo podía seguir adelante, que había muchas cosas más para vivir y que eh, tenía mucho por delante. Mi hermana estaba junto a él también y eh, mi hermana también es un poco de carácter fuerte y trataba de hacerlo entrar en razón, pero hay veces que no hay mucha razón para ese tipo de cuestiones que el corazón no entiende. Y recuerdo que me llamó por teléfono y me preguntó qué estaba haciendo. Digo, no, estoy en la casa de la tía. No, perdón. Le dije que estaba en la casa de una amiga, que había ido a la casa de una amiga que era de cumpleaños. Y me dice, ah, bueno, bueno. Y bueno, ¿y vos estás bien? Me pregunta. Y le digo, sí, sí, estoy bien. Y me dice, ¿tenés noticia de tu mamá? No, no, la verdad que no tengo idea de mi mamá, le digo. Y me dice, bueno, bueno. Y no recuerdo qué fue que me dijo. Si me dijo algo más. Recuerdo que después me mandó un mensaje de texto diciéndome que se arrepentía de no haber sido un buen padre, de que él podría haber hecho las cosas mucho mejor. Pero que bueno, que no había algunas cosas que él ya no podía cambiar, que ya estaban hechas. Yo no le presté atención al mensaje, había recibido un par de veces mensajes de él así, pero siempre era porque se había peleado con mi mamá y se iban a separar o algo así iba a pasar. Entonces como siempre estaba llorando la carta y haciéndose pasar como víctima, entonces no le presté atención. Entonces pasó todo eso, eso fue antes del mediodía, antes habrá sido 11:30 o 12. Y recuerdo que como a la 1:30 me llamó mi hermana llorando y me dice que mi papá se había quitado la vida. En ese momento yo era como pasaba a ser el responsable de la familia. Entonces le digo a mi hermana, bueno, pero llamaste a la policía, llamaste a la ambulancia. Me dice, sí, sí, ya llamé a todo, vinieron los tíos, la abuela, vinieron los abuelos, todo. Bueno, está bien, le digo. No te preocupes, yo mañana estoy allá. Estamos hablando de que era un viaje de, si íbamos en avión, eran 2 horas. Y en colectivo son 18 horas. Entonces le dije a mi mamá, nos tenemos que ir a Neuquén, pasó esto. Y me dice, bueno, vamos a tener que ir. Así que, y en ese momento nos acompañó mi tía de Buenos Aires y una tía que estaba de misiones, que estaba de viaje también visitando a mi tía de Buenos Aires, decidió viajar con nosotros. Así que los 4 nos fuimos para Neuquén. No recuerdo haber tenido emociones fuertes en ese momento. Recuerdo que estaba tranquilo, sabía que no había otra manera, no había algo que yo pudiese hacer en ese momento. Ya estaba hecho y lo único que quedaba era para ayudar a mi hermana que lo superara, porque ella fue la que lo encontró. Entonces yo tenía que estar con ella ahora. Y recuerdo que no hicimos un funeral. Él nunca quiso hacer funeral. Él decía de que toda su familia eran hipócritas y que realmente nunca se preocuparon por él y que nunca le dieron una mano. Entonces él no quería un funeral, él no quería que la gente vaya a verlo y a llorar al lado de él como si alguna vez le hubiese importado. Entonces respetamos su voluntad y no hubo funeral. Pero recuerdo que cuando fuimos a verlo, porque te dan permiso para ir a verlo a la morgue, lo fuimos a ver y había mucha gente, muchos amigos de él, muchos familiares lejanos de mi familia, de mi papá, que no nos veíamos siempre, pero sabíamos que eran cercanos, que a pesar de que era una línea muy lejana de nuestra familia, eran siempre los que tuvimos más afecto y que nos sentimos más cerca de ellos. Y recuerdo de que en ese momento no tuve bronca, no tuve dolor. Yo lo miraba a mi papá ahí en el ataúd y era como... y bueno, nos vemos más adelante. No hay nada para hacer. Y Me dolió saber que no lo iba a ver más. De que ahora tengo una familia hermosa y él no la conoció. Me dolió que no le pude dar una mano, de que no pude realmente ayudarle. Que esa llamada y ese mensaje fueron como, ¿qué hago? Y yo me presté atención. No me lo reprocho porque seguramente uno hubiese intentado y mi hermana intentó hacerlo entrar en razón, pero el testarudo como era, no, él hizo lo que él quería. Así que no me reprocho no haberle podido ayudar, pero sí el hecho de que ni siquiera intenté. Cuando él fallece, como dije, mi mamá se había ido a vivir con nosotros a Buenos Aires. Y nosotros, si bien residíamos en esa casa, era esporádicamente con mi hermana solamente la temporada de vacaciones. Y volvía la temporada de clases, entonces nos íbamos de vuelta para Buenos Aires a estudiar y mi mamá estaba viviendo con nosotros ahora en Buenos Aires. Mi papá era el único que iba a quedar en la casa y ahora él no estaba más. El arremangarme y empezar a limpiar la casa, empezar a sacar casi 30 años de cosas que teníamos en la casa me ayudó un montón. Yo no era de limpiar y detenidamente ir pasando remera por remera y pensar, ay, me saqué esta foto, o con esta camiseta de mi papá cenamos aquella vez. Yo era más de limpiar todo, de mantenerme activo y de que mi mente en realidad se enfocara en otras cosas. Mi papá, él nació, él no nació en el pueblo en el que yo nací, él nació en un pueblito más chico todavía, en el centro de Neuquén, en un recóndito lugar. Y creció en el campo, creció aprendiendo de cómo trabajar la tierra, cómo criar cabras, vacas, caballos, cómo trabajar con ellos. Siempre disfruté con él poder ir al campo y poder ver cómo él trabajaba. Y aprendí mucho de él, cómo se desempeñaba en el campo y enlazar, cómo andar a caballo, poder faenar chivos o vacas. Y después aprendí mucho de respeto de él, respeto por las personas, de saber cuál es mi lugar y poder entender que en la sociedad todos tenemos que ocupar un lugar y tenemos que saber convivir entre todos. Él me enseñó mucho de eso. Muy exagerado para jugar a las cartas. Siempre gritaba y era un escándalo lo que armaba ahí cuando jugaba a las cartas. Y, todo le gustaba jugar a las cartas con él por eso justo. Porque era muy chistoso como gritaba. Pero sí, creo que el abuso que él sintió y que él sufrió por parte de mis abuelos al ser chico, al ser un niño, lo marcó para toda su vida. La expectativa de vida de una persona hoy por hoy son 70 años seguramente, si no es más. Y los problemas son de días, meses. Una enfermedad pueden ser años. No pueden ser 70. Nunca van a ser 70. Tenemos más cosas lindas por vivir esta vida que feas. Para una persona que es familiar de alguien que está con depresión y está pensando en, o que ha intentado inclusive quitarse la vida, creo que lo mejor es no enojarse. Muchos sienten eso, sienten enojo, sienten pesar por el hecho de que no le pueden ayudar o que realmente no pudieron hacer las cosas correctas para que esa persona no llegara a esa instancia. Pero hacerle notar que realmente nos apoyamos en él y que realmente lo necesitamos, de que apreciamos la persona, que sí que realmente lo queremos junto a nosotros, le va a ayudar mucho a la otra persona. Creo que ese es el mejor enfoque que podemos dar como familiar de una persona que está en esa situación. Y creo que para una persona que es familiar, que de alguien que ya ha fallecido en estas circunstancias, diría que no se ponga en la situación de tratar de entender por qué lo hizo. Una persona que se quita la vida no está bien psicológicamente. Uno nunca va a poder entender qué es lo que pasa por la cabeza de una persona cuando se quita la vida. Creo que una persona que es familiar de un fallecido, lo mejor que puede hacer es recordar al fallecido en sus mejores momentos, poder reírse de vuelta de viejos chistes, de situaciones incómodas que hayan pasado con esta persona que ya no está, poder recorrer momentos felices y poder ver que en todo eso había vida y que la vida sigue, que tenemos que seguir adelante y tenemos que aprender a vivir con eso. Hoy va a ser un dolor muy fuerte, pero en un tiempo ya no duele. Y en un tiempo uno lo va a extrañar. Pero más allá de las creencias religiosas que pueda tener o no la persona esta, que tenga la seguridad de que al final todos vamos a estar juntos.
Suicide, it is something we need to talk about more, first of all. If we want to jump back just a little bit, when I was 19 years old, my uncle took his life, and I remember attending his funeral and was just so uncertain. I think the uncertainty of just knowing how to deal with that was really traumatizing for me. I didn't know quite where to find comfort in this situation. So that was kind of early on. That was before I really dealt with mental illness myself. So it was so foreign and very, very upsetting. Most personal experiences I've had with suicidal thoughts came when I was facing postpartum depression and anxiety and panic disorder following the birth of my third baby. I had 2 other little kids and then my third, and I had a husband who traveled a lot for work. About 4 days after that baby was born, I knew something wasn't right. I had dealt with a little bit of postpartum illness following the birth of my second baby several years before that. What was about to happen, I could have never anticipated how difficult it was. So I was feeling off and reached out to family and friends and said, I'm gonna need some help. I think I've got, some postpartum stuff going on and things just don't feel quite right. But in spite of all efforts to pull me up and out of it, it only got worse. So what began as kind of anxiety, if you want to call it that, and just kind of a feeling of anxiousness, 3.5 months in turned into panic attacks, several within a 24-hour period, where I just was out of control. My body would shake and my muscles would contract and just really intense fear. So at that point, we started me on a medication, but because I was breastfeeding, there were some medications that they couldn't give me and some I was really nervous to take. And I think that watching my uncle's mental illness as a child and seeing him pass away from it made me really fearful of medication, because I remember that he had tried so many different medications and nothing was helping, and so I was really reluctant. But at that point, I was so sick, I knew I needed to try something. So I took a medication and I experienced what's called the paradoxical effect. So up until that point, I hadn't had any suicidal thoughts, really. But so the paradoxical effect means it did exactly the opposite of what it was supposed to do. So it was supposed to help the anxiety settle, of course, and help things settle down. And what it did was the opposite. So it threw me into the most severe panic attack I've ever experienced, which lasted about 5 hours. And my throat tightened up, and I just remember, like, when it threw me into that, I was shaking violently, and I woke my husband up, and I said, I don't know what's going wrong, but I need help. Like, I need the hospital. I need you to call 911. I don't know what's going on. And he didn't know either. He had seen me have panic attacks, but nothing quite like this. But we had an EMT who lived across the street, and this was the middle of the night, but he contacted our neighbor, Matt, who came over. He spoke in really soft tones, and as I was shaking and just out of control, I felt a really intense urge that if I were to get out of my bed, I would throw myself against the wall. I can't really explain that. I don't know why that is, but that's how mental illness is, and I think until I experienced that out of controlness, I totally misunderstood people who had experienced it. It was sheer terror. I was so terrified. But I remember that this EMT was standing right next to the bed, and as I shook violently, he had his arms folded like this. And he's a very strong man. And I just remember hoping that he would just stay right there. And if he stood there, then I knew I'd be okay. Eventually, once the intense shaking subsided and I felt like I could get up and walk around a little bit, then he eventually went home, and I had my husband come outside with me. The pain just hit, like all of this pain and just I don't know what it is, what chemical it is in your body, but I had to run. So I started running through my neighborhood just to kind of deal with the pain of that panic. That was kind of the beginning. And that urge to throw myself against the wall is kind of the way that the suicidal thoughts started. That was kind of the earliest inkling into what was about to happen. And so following that, what I later learned were called intrusive thoughts tormented me. They began tormenting me. And what it was for me was I would just be going about my day or trying to take care of my baby and my kids. And then I'd sit down to nurse my baby. And all of a sudden, like, I would just start to shake, and I would just visualize really vivid, extremely terrifying things. Some of them were visualizing myself killing myself or hurting my baby, which was excruciating because that was like the most opposite thing of my nature that I would ever do. But there was so much fear associated with that because I thought if somebody knew that I was having thoughts like that, they would judge me. And so I didn't know what to do in those situations. There's enough fear with a panic attack, but then to have the fear of being judged for what I'm experiencing made everything worse. I couldn't sleep anymore because anytime I tried to fall asleep, I'd wake up. I was trying to exercise, but I got to where I was so sick that sometimes I'd walk a few blocks and then I couldn't go any further and I'd have to call my husband to come pick me up. We had people trying to come help me, and essentially they'd come over and didn't know what to do to help me. And I'd say, I just need you here, just talk to me, because I just was facing a lot of pain and a lot of fear all the time. And I was trying to take care of my kids. A lot of the things just weren't effective. And because I had had that reaction to medication, I was so terrified to try anything else. But I was trying to deal with it the best that I could, which just meant I just kept going until I couldn't go anymore. I could no longer drive at this point because I was so panicky and so shaky, and I got dizzy all the time. And I remember nursing him early that morning and then just looking at him and basically telling him, I can't do this anymore. My body has nothing left to give. Up to that point, I was so afraid to go to the hospital because I thought they would have to keep me overnight. And I was so afraid that I wouldn't be able to take care of my babies. But But at that point, I thought, I have to turn a corner. I can't eat anymore. I can't sleep anymore. But this is where I turned a corner, at that appointment in the emergency room. What happened was a social worker came in, because if you come into the emergency room with mental illness and, worries of suicide, that kind of a thing, they send a social worker in to assess if you're a danger to yourself or others. So they send a social worker in, and I looked to her. It was kind of funny, and maybe it sounds silly, but she was like a fairy godmother. I don't know how else to describe her, but when she walked in the room, she had little glasses on the end of her nose and silver hair. And she walked in and sat across from me and started asking me a few questions about what was going on, and really weakly just told her, I'm having these thoughts all the time. That I'm gonna hurt myself, or I'm going to kill myself, or I'm going to hurt my baby. And I'm so scared that I'm going to lose control and do it. And then she just kind of calmly asked me, well, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you like to do? And I was kind of like, well, at this point, I don't know, but I know that before I liked to bake, and I liked to garden, and I liked to do these other things. And then up until that point, no one had boldly looked me in the eyes and done this. And she said, okay, well, I don't know you very well, but based on what I can see and what I do know, you're not gonna do any of those things. And that was the first moment when I thought, wow, maybe there's a way out of this. And then she calmly told me, okay, I want you to do 3 things for me. The doctor's gonna give you some medication, and I know you're scared to take it, but I want you to take a deep breath, and I want you to say, this is gonna help. And I want you to take the medication that the doctor tells you to take. And she said, I want you to get the app Headspace, and I want you to go home, and I want you to meditate every day. And the 3rd thing I want you to do is I want you to go home, and I want you to try baking again. Just her approach was exactly what I needed. Somebody had confidence in me, but she just knew exactly what to do. She knew to express that confidence in me. And so that was where I turned a corner. The knee-jerk reaction to a lot of these really, really fierce and difficult emotions is to get away from them. And I had been doing that. I had been running. I had been, distracting myself. I'm a very busy person in general. And so I would feel these things, but I think, well, I gotta take care of my kids. I gotta clean the house. I gotta do these things. And so I would more or less just push them away and just, I can't deal with it. But when you meditate and you sit there, and I did it for 10 minutes a day, I would sit there and just feel. And as I did that, it was like I was learning to feel those emotions, learning to look them in the face, learning to look at the intrusive thoughts and to see them for what they were. That if I could write a note to anyone dealing with suicidal thoughts, maybe even someone who was to the point where they had a plan, I just hope that somehow I could tell them, I would so much rather hear your story than attend your funeral. I'll listen, even if I don't know how to solve it. There are people who will listen. I'm one of those. Even if I never met you, I will listen. But there are so many people I know that have experienced it. You're not alone.
Remember to look out for warning signs of suicide. You could be the answer to somebody's cry for help. And remember, there are not always going to be visible or noticeable warning signs before somebody takes their own life. Never blame yourself for the decision of another person. As we all educate ourselves about the warning signs and risk factors of suicide and are vigilant in watching for these in the lives of those around us, we could potentially save lives. So be vigilant and be brave in speaking up when you notice something that doesn't seem right.